The moment I stepped into the ballroom, I heard her say it. She didn't even bother lowering her voice. Lila Grant, my brother's flawless fiancée, leaned toward her bridesmaids, champagne flute tilted just enough to look effortless, and whispered with surgical precision, "Oh great, the stinky country girl is here." She meant for it to travel. And it did. A ripple of laughter followed, sharp, practiced, the kind that came from women wrapped in designer silk who had never been told they didn't belong anywhere. Lila didn't turn to look at me. She didn't need to. To her, I wasn't worth the effort. I was background noise, an inconvenience, a smudge from a small town threatening the aesthetic of her perfect engagement party. I stood there, just inside the entrance of the ballroom, and let the insult settle. What Lila didn't know, what no one in that glittering room knew, was that I had signed the deed to this hotel 3 years ago. The Halcyon Hotel, every crystal chandelier glowing above her head, every polished piece of silverware resting on linen-draped tables, every slab of imported marble beneath her overpriced heels. All of it belonged to me. And before the night was over, that single whisper was going to cost her everything she thought she was marrying into. My name is Sydney Holt. I'm 31 years old, and I grew up in Indiana County, Pennsylvania, a place so small that everyone knew when someone else's dog got loose. The kind of town where ambition felt suspicious and leaving was treated like betrayal. I left at 18 with one suitcase, $200, and a quiet certainty that if I stayed, I would disappear. Not because I hated where I came from, but because my family made it very clear there wasn't room for me there. I have an older brother, Evan Holt, 3 years older, the golden child, the son who could do no wrong. Growing up, everything I did was measured against him, and I always came up short. If I brought home an A, Evan had an A+. If I joined a team, he was already a captain. My mother, Linda Holt, had a way of looking at me as if I were a rough draft, while Evan was the finished work framed and displayed. So I left, quietly, without fanfare. Everyone back home assumed I struggled, and for a while they weren't wrong. I lived in a cramped apartment. I ate instant noodles. I worked jobs no one would brag about. What they didn't know was that I took a position as a cleaning attendant at a boutique hotel in Philadelphia, and that job changed the trajectory of my life. I watched, I listened, I learned. I moved from housekeeping to front desk, from front desk to assistant manager, from assistant manager to running entire properties. I saved aggressively, I invested carefully. I made mistakes and corrected them faster. By 28, I owned my first hotel. By 30, I owned 3. Now, at 31, I run Holt Hospitality Group with 5 boutique hotels across the Northeast. The Halcyon is my flagship. But when you build something from nothing, you learn an important skill early on. You learn how to stay quiet. People underestimate what they don't understand. And sometimes, that's the safest place to be. So I never told my family. They never asked. To them, I was still the struggling younger sister who couldn't keep up with Evan and his steady middle management job at an insurance firm. The irony could have filled the ballroom by itself. Tonight, I had received a last-minute invitation to Evan's engagement party. A courtesy invite. Probably my mother's idea. The kind meant more for appearances than inclusion. I almost didn't come. But something pulled me here. Curiosity, maybe. Or a small, stubborn hope that time had softened old patterns. It hadn't. I stood in my own hotel wearing jeans and my favorite boots, my hair still faintly carrying the scent of the countryside because I'd driven through Indiana County on the way here, just to remind myself where I came from. My outfit cost more than everything Lila was wearing combined, but you wouldn't know it by looking. That's the thing about real money. It doesn't need to announce itself. I scanned the room. Ice sculptures shaped like swans. A champagne fountain that bordered on excessive. Enough flowers to make a botanical garden insecure. My staff had executed everything flawlessly. I felt a flicker of pride beneath the irritation. Across the room, my mother was holding court with her friends, smiling brightly, basking in reflected importance. Evan stood beside Lila, looking like a man convinced he'd won the lottery. He had no idea he was holding a losing ticket. Lila finally glanced in my direction. Her smile sharpened, quick and dismissive, before she turned back to her audience. I wasn't family to her. I was an eyesore. That was fine. Let her think I was nobody. Let them all think it. Because I had learned something long before tonight. The best kind of power doesn't shout. It waits. It watches. It lets people reveal exactly who they are before it moves. I walked to the bar and ordered a drink. My staff knew better than to acknowledge me. Daniel Moore, the general manager, caught my eye from across the room and gave me a subtle nod. Everything was running perfectly. Good. Because in about 3 hours, Lila Grant was going to learn a lesson she would never forget. Never underestimate the country girl, especially when she owns the ground you're standing on. Before we continue, if you're enjoying this story, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I read every single one, and it truly means more than you know. Now, back to the story. Leaving Indiana County didn't feel dramatic at the time. There was no argument, no slammed doors, no speech about finding myself. I packed a single suitcase, folded my clothes with the kind of care that comes from knowing you don't have backups, and waited for the bus at the edge of town before dawn. The air smelled like wet grass and fertilizer, the familiar scent of a place that had shaped me and quietly told me it expected nothing more from me than to stay small. No one came to see me off. My mother had said goodbye the night before, distracted, already thinking about Evan's schedule, Evan's future, Evan's next milestone. My father, Thomas Holt, had given me a brief hug and a quiet, "Call when you get there," as if I were going on a weekend trip instead of leaving my entire life behind. Evan hadn't even been home. He never was when it mattered. I told myself that was fine. I didn't need a send-off. I needed space. Philadelphia was loud, impatient, and unapologetic. I rented a room so small I could touch both walls if I stretched my arms out, and I took the first job that didn't require connections or a polished resume. That job happened to be at a boutique hotel downtown. Nothing glamorous, nothing impressive. I scrubbed bathrooms. I changed sheets. I learned how to make myself invisible while still doing the work properly. But I paid attention. I noticed how guests spoke differently to front desk staff than they did to housekeeping. I watched how managers handled complaints, how small gestures diffused big problems, how tone mattered as much as policy. I memorized patterns, learned names, figured out which details actually mattered and which ones were just noise. When a supervisor called out sick, I volunteered to cover. When someone quit, I took on extra shifts. I learned the reservation system faster than anyone expected. Within a year, I was moved to the front desk. A year after that, I was assisting with scheduling and vendor coordination. By the time I was 23, I was running night operations 3 days a week. I wasn't brilliant. I was relentless. I lived cheaply. I saved everything I could. While my coworkers went out after shifts, I went home and read about hospitality models, cash flow, and property acquisition. I learned how hotels actually made money, not from the obvious things, but from the margins. I learned what banks looked for, what scared investors, and what made numbers believable. At 26, I made my first mistake. I trusted a partner who talked too much and planned too little. I lost money I couldn't afford to lose. It hurt, it embarrassed me, and it taught me more than any success ever could. 2 years later, I bought my first property. It wasn't beautiful, it was outdated, poorly managed, and overlooked, but it was mine. I renovated slowly, carefully, doing the work in phases so I wouldn't overextend myself. I focused on service first, reputation second, profit third. The results came anyway. By 30, I owned 3 boutique hotels. That's when I formally incorporated Holt Hospitality Group. Not because I needed a name, but because lenders did. Growth accelerated after that. I hired people smarter than me. I listened to them. I trusted data over ego. When the opportunity to acquire the Halcyon came up, I hesitated for exactly one night. Then I signed. The Halcyon wasn't just another hotel. It was a statement, a flagship, a place people noticed. I kept my ownership quiet, buried beneath holding companies and clean paperwork. It wasn't secrecy for the sake of deception. It was privacy. The kind you earn when you've learned how quickly people feel entitled to your success. My family never knew. Family never. They didn't know that every month a payment arrived at their mortgage company. Anonymous, consistent, quiet. They didn't know I covered medical bills when my father's health started slipping, or utilities when winter hit harder than expected. I never put my name on anything. I never asked for thanks. I just didn't want them to struggle, even if they never saw me clearly. Somehow, that kindness became invisible too. My mother assumed the money came from Evan. Of course she did. In her mind, it made perfect sense. Her successful son taking care of his parents. Her daughter, meanwhile, was still a question mark she didn't bother solving. I never corrected her. I told myself it didn't matter. It mattered more than I realized. Standing in the Halcyon ballroom now, years later, I could trace every step that had brought me here. Every late night. Every risk. Every moment I chose patience over recognition. Lila Grant didn't know any of that. To her, I was a caricature. A background character from a town she'd never bothered to visit. She had no idea how much ground I'd covered since leaving that bus stop. And the thing about people like Lila is that they mistake silence for weakness. They assume if you don't announce yourself, you must have nothing worth hearing. They confuse humility with absence. I took a slow sip of my drink and watched the room with the calm that only comes from knowing exactly where you stand, even when no one else does. This wasn't my first time being underestimated. It was just the first time the consequences were about to be public. I let the noise of the ballroom wash over me as I stood near the edge, the weight of the past still humming quietly beneath my skin. The music was light, expensive, carefully chosen not to offend anyone with taste. Laughter rose and fell in practiced waves, glasses clinked, everything looked exactly the way it was supposed to, and still I felt 12 years old again. I spotted my mother before she spotted me. Linda Holt stood near the center of the room, perfectly positioned, her posture straight, her smile polished. She was holding court with a small circle of women, friends, acquaintances, people whose names she remembered only when it mattered. I recognized that smile. It was the one she used when she felt proud of how things appeared. Evan's engagement had given her something to present, something that reflected well on her, and she was savoring it. Evan stood a few feet away from her, close enough to be included, far enough to look independent. He looked good, confident, comfortable, like someone who believed life had unfolded exactly the way it was supposed to for him. Lila was at his side, radiant, laughing easily, accepting admiration like it was her due. I watched them for a moment before my mother noticed me. Her eyes flicked in my direction, paused, then narrowed just slightly. She excused herself from the group and walked toward me with the careful expression she reserved for conversations she didn't quite want to have. She looked me up and down, jeans, boots, simple top, and her mouth tightened. "Well," she said, her tone suggesting she was still deciding how she felt about my presence. "You made it," I smiled politely. "I did." Her gaze lingered on my boots. "You couldn't have dressed up a little more? Lila's family is very refined." She emphasized the word as if it were something I should aspire to understand. "I came straight from work," I said evenly. Which was true. I just didn't explain that work meant running a multi-million-dollar company that owned the building she was standing in. She sighed. The same sigh I had heard my entire life, the one that carried disappointment without confrontation. "Well, just try to make a good impression tonight," she said. "This is important for Evan. Important for Evan, always." She didn't wait for a response before drifting back into the crowd, already reassembling her smile. The entire exchange had lasted less than 30 seconds, and yet my chest felt tight, like I'd been holding my breath the whole time. Some things never changed. I took another sip of my drink and turned slightly, just in time to see Evan approaching. He smiled when he saw me. Warm, familiar, distant, all at once. "Hey," he said, "I'm glad you could come." I nodded. "Congratulations." He beamed. "Thanks. Isn't Lila amazing?" "She's memorable," I said, choosing my words carefully. He laughed, already glancing past me as if scanning for someone else he needed to greet. Then, casually, like he was commenting on the weather, he said, "Oh, Mom gave Lila Grandma's necklace as an engagement gift. Wasn't that generous?" The room seemed to tilt. I felt the air leave my lungs so suddenly it caught me off guard. "Grandma's necklace?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Evan nodded, oblivious. "Yeah, Lila loved it. Said it was perfect." Perfect. I didn't respond. I couldn't. My eyes found Lila across the room, and there it was, resting against her collarbone, catching the light from the chandeliers. The antique pendant. Delicate. Familiar. My grandmother's necklace. The one she had promised to me. I remembered the weight of her hand in mine, the smell of lavender in her small living room, the way her voice softened when she spoke to me. She had told me it was mine because I was her dreamer, her fighter, the one who would leave and build something of her own. My mother had been there, she had heard every word, and still she gave it away, to Lila. I stared at the necklace, my throat tight, my mind suddenly loud with memories I hadn't invited back. It wasn't about the jewelry, it was about what it represented, what it had always represented, being chosen, being seen. I excused myself from Evan without explanation and moved toward the restroom, needing space to breathe. The music felt too loud now, the laughter too sharp. As I walked down the hallway, I passed a man pacing near the wall, his phone pressed to his ear. Howard Grant. He didn't see me. He was too focused on his conversation. "We just need to get through the ceremony," he said in a low, urgent voice. "The Holt family has money. Enough to cover this. We'll be fine once it's official." I slowed my steps, my attention sharpening. "Yes," he continued after a pause. "We just need this wedding to happen." He hung up, smoothed his jacket, and walked back toward the ballroom, his expression resetting into confidence. I stood there for a moment, the image of my grandmother's necklace fading behind a much colder realization. The Holt family had money. What money? My parents' house was mortgaged. Evan's salary was comfortable, not exceptional. There was no hidden fortune, no safety net, unless he meant me. The thought settled heavily in my chest as I turned back toward the ballroom. Somewhere behind the music and the smiles, something was wrong. And for the first time that night, I wasn't just hurt. I was alert. The words followed me back into the ballroom, settling into my thoughts like grit that refused to shake loose. The Holt family has money. I moved slowly, deliberately, letting my expression settle back into something neutral. If Howard Grant had noticed me standing there, if he suspected for even a second that I'd heard him, he gave no sign. He was already back in character, smiling, laughing, playing the proud future father-in-law as if nothing had cracked beneath the surface. But something had cracked. I could feel it. I took up a spot near the edge of the room again, this time not as a passive observer, but as someone watching for tells. It was a shift so subtle no one else would have noticed. The music hadn't changed. The champagne still flowed, the ice sculptures still glittered under the lights. But once suspicion takes root, the entire room rearranges itself around it. Howard Grant checked his phone. Once, twice, then again, his jaw tightening each time he glanced at the screen. Elaine Grant stood beside him, nodding at guests while absently touching her necklace, fingers brushing the stones as if she were counting them, making sure they were still there. Her smile stayed fixed, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. And Lila, perfect, radiant Lila, had a restlessness about her that hadn't been there earlier. She laughed easily enough, but there was a sharp hunger beneath it, an urgency that felt out of place for someone celebrating an engagement. She leaned in too close when people spoke to her, listened too carefully when money or business came up, asked questions that were just a shade too pointed. Once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. They weren't celebrating. They were performing. I replayed Howard's words in my head, testing them from every angle. The Holt family has money. It wasn't a guess. It wasn't hope. It was confidence. Which meant it came from somewhere. From information they believed was solid. But the information was wrong. My parents weren't wealthy. They lived comfortably, yes, but barely. There was still a mortgage on the house. I knew because I'd been quietly paying it down for 4 years. Evan earned a respectable salary, but nothing that suggested hidden millions. There was no trust fund, no investments worth mentioning, no safety net that could cover anything significant, unless they thought Evan was the source. The realization landed slowly, then all at once. Every month, like clockwork, payments went out from Holt Hospitality Group. Mortgage, utilities, medical bills when my father's health faltered. I never put my name on anything. I never asked questions. I never announced myself. I told myself it was kindness without expectation. But silence leaves room for assumptions. My mother, desperate to believe her golden child had become the man she'd always imagined, must have filled in the blanks herself. Evan never corrected her. Maybe he didn't even know the details. Maybe he assumed things were just handled. And she, Linda Holt, likely bragged. Quietly, casually. The way people do when they want admiration without scrutiny. My son takes care of us. He's very responsible. He's done quite well. Enough breadcrumbs for the wrong people to follow. The Grants had done their homework. They'd seen a house with no missed payments. Parents who didn't seem worried about money. A family that appeared stable, quietly affluent, unassuming enough not to attract attention. Perfect cover. They hadn't targeted Evan because they loved him. They'd targeted him because they believed he was connected to money that wasn't actually his. And suddenly, the engagement made a different kind of sense. I spent the next hour watching them with purpose. Every interaction, every smile timed just a little too precisely. Howard drifted from guest to guest, steering conversations toward business, investments, connections. Elaine listened more than she spoke, cataloging reactions. Lila stayed close to Evan, anchoring herself to him physically, possessively, as if afraid someone might pull her away. They weren't relaxed. They were calculating. A chill settled over me as the full picture began to assemble itself. This wasn't about love or family or joining lives. This was about access, about optics, about survival. And whatever situation Howard had mentioned on the phone, it wasn't theoretical. It was immediate. I felt my hurt over the necklace recede, replaced by something sharper, more focused. My family hadn't just been careless, they'd been selected. The irony would have been almost funny if it weren't so dangerous. I scanned the room until I found Daniel Moore near the service entrance, clipboard in hand, quietly overseeing the catering staff. He was doing exactly what I'd hired him to do, making sure everything ran smoothly without drawing attention to himself. When his eyes met mine, the professional mask slipped just enough to show recognition. I walked toward him, my steps measured. "Everything okay?" he asked softly, defaulting to formality before correcting himself. "Sydney." "I need a favor," I said. "Discreet." He didn't hesitate. "What do you need?" "Background information on the Grant family, business records, news articles, anything public, anything not." Daniel's expression shifted just slightly. "How quickly?" "As soon as possible." He nodded once. No questions, no curiosity. That was why I trusted him. He turned and disappeared down the hall, already pulling his phone from his pocket. I went back to the party, my smile returning automatically, my posture relaxed. To anyone watching, I was just the overlooked sister nursing a drink. No threat, no relevance. That was fine. Because now I knew something was wrong. And when you know that, you stop reacting and start preparing. Whatever the Grants thought they were marrying into, whatever money they believed was waiting on the other side of this engagement, it wasn't real. And when that illusion collapsed, it wasn't just going to affect them. It was going to tear straight through my family, unless I stopped it. I kept my face calm as I moved through the room, but my mind was already elsewhere, quietly sorting facts, probabilities, risks. Once you've built something from the ground up, you learn to separate emotion from action when it matters most. Hurt can wait. Confusion can wait. What couldn't wait was figuring out exactly how deep the Grants' lie went. Daniel Moore didn't reappear for almost 40 minutes. That alone told me enough to be concerned. When he finally approached, it wasn't in the ballroom. He caught me near the service corridor, away from the noise, where the polished illusion of the evening gave way to plain walls and efficiency. His expression was controlled, but his eyes were alert in a way that meant he'd found something worth taking seriously. "I pulled what I could," he said quietly. "Public records, business registrations, news mentions." "And?" I asked. "And none of it lines up the way it should." He handed me a slim folder. I didn't open it yet. I didn't need to. Daniel had worked for me long enough to know he wouldn't interrupt an event like this without reason. "Thank you," I said. "I'll take a look." I stepped into the underground parking garage to give myself privacy, the echo of my boots sharp against the concrete. The air was cooler down there, the kind of cold that clears your head. I leaned against my car and opened the folder. At first glance, it was subtle. Inconsistencies. Business entities that dissolved and reformed under similar names. Gaps in timelines. Properties listed at values that didn't match market records. Then I saw it, an article buried deep in a regional archive from Phoenix, Arizona. 3 years old. A civil investigation involving a real estate investment firm that promised high returns and delivered nothing. Different names, same structure. I exhaled slowly. This wasn't amateur work. It was organized, repeated, intentional. I pulled out my phone and made the first call that mattered. Claire Donovan answered on the second ring, despite it being nearly 9 o'clock. That was why I paid her what I did. "Sydney," she said, "this sounds urgent." "It is," I replied. "I need you to verify some information for me, quickly." I gave her a concise overview, enough to frame the situation without speculation. Claire asked the right questions, the kind that told me she was already running through legal pathways in her head. "I'll cross-check what you have," she said. "If there's anything active, anything federal, I'll find it." "Thank you." I didn't wait. I made the second call immediately. Rachel Kim picked up on video, her dark hair pulled back, glasses perched low on her nose. "You look like you found a problem," she said, half smiling. "I did," I said, and sent her photos from the folder. Financial statements, corporate filings, names. "Tell me what you see." Rachel went quiet. Her eyes scanned quickly, fingers already moving as she pulled up databases I didn't have access to. Minutes passed, then she leaned back, her expression sharpening. "This is textbook," she said. "Ponzi-style real estate fraud. Early investors paid with later money, shell companies to hide cash flow, inflated valuations, and—" She paused, tapping the screen. "This name here? It shows up in Arizona under a different identity." My stomach tightened. "The bride?" Rachel nodded once. "Her real name isn't Lila Grant." I closed my eyes briefly, letting the confirmation settle. When I opened them again, I asked, "How sure are you?" "Sure enough that I'd testify to it," she said. "And there's more. The Arizona case never closed. It stalled because the subjects vanished, changed names, moved states. If they resurfaced tonight under new identities—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. They weren't just pretending to be wealthy. They were running. I ended the call and leaned my head back against the car, the concrete cold against my neck. My grandmother's necklace, my mother's blindness, Evan's engagement. None of it was coincidence. The Grants hadn't stumbled into our lives. They'd chosen us. And here was the worst part, the one that made my chest ache in a way I hadn't expected. When the truth came out, they wouldn't cling to Evan. They'd abandon him. The moment the illusion of money disappeared, they'd vanish, leaving behind humiliation and damage that couldn't be undone. Part of me wanted to let it happen, to let my family finally feel what it was like to be discarded, to understand what it meant to be valued only for what you could provide. It would have been poetic, clean, but I couldn't. As flawed as my family was, they were still mine. Evan was still the boy who taught me to ride a bike. My mother was still the woman who stayed up with me when I was sick, even if she later forgot how to see me clearly. Love doesn't disappear just because resentment exists beside it. So I made a decision. I was going to expose the Grants. Publicly, completely. And I was going to do it in a way that left no room for denial, no chance for escape. Before we continue, if this story is resonating with you, take a second to like the video and leave a comment. It helps more than you know, and I appreciate every single one of you. Rachel called back less than an hour later. Her voice was tight, not with fear, but with the energy of someone who'd uncovered something big. "Sydney," she said. "They've been doing this for at least a decade. Different names, different cities, same playbook. And there's an active federal investigation. They're wanted." I looked at my watch. 8 minutes until 9. The timing wasn't accidental. The Grants had chosen tonight because they believed it was safe, because they thought they were finally crossing into protection. They had no idea the room they were standing in belonged to me. I straightened, closed the folder, and headed back toward the ballroom. It was time to stop watching. It was time to act. Lila found me before I had the chance to find her. She appeared at my side as if summoned by instinct, her presence sudden and deliberate, her hand slipping lightly around my arm with the practiced familiarity of someone who wanted witnesses to see closeness where none existed. From a distance, it probably looked warm, intimate, sisterly even. Up close, it felt like a warning. "Sydney," she said brightly, her smile flawless. "We should talk, just the two of us." Her grip tightened just enough to make the request feel less optional. She steered me toward a quieter corner near the restrooms, away from the music and the eyes. The moment we were out of earshot, the warmth drained from her expression like it had never been there at all. I almost admired the speed of it. "I know about you," she said, folding her arms, studying me with open disdain. "I know you send money home every month." I kept my face neutral. "Do you?" She laughed softly, shaking her head as if I were hopelessly naive. "I just don't understand it," she continued. "Why someone who can barely afford their own life would keep throwing money at people who don't even appreciate them." There it was. The assumption sat between us, unspoken but heavy. I waited. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Unless," she said, eyes narrowing, "you're trying to buy their love. Prove you're worth something. It's a little sad, don't you think?" I felt something tighten in my chest. Not anger, not surprise, but clarity. This was how she saw me. Not generous, not capable, desperate, small. "Evan told me everything," she went on smoothly. "How you were always jealous of him. How you couldn't handle not being the favorite. Honestly, it must be exhausting, living in someone else's shadow your entire life." I held her gaze, unmoving. She smiled again, sharper this time. "I'm marrying into this family. I'll be here permanently, and I really think it would be better for everyone if you stayed away." She patted my arm, the gesture patronizing and final. "No one would miss you." Dead weight, unspoken but implied. Then she turned and walked away, her heels clicking confidently down the hall, already reassembling her public persona. I stood there for a moment after she was gone, the quiet pressing in around me. Lila Grant thought she understood me. She thought I was broke. She thought the money came from Evan. In her mind, I wasn't powerful, I was pathetic. A woman scraping together funds she couldn't afford, hoping generosity might buy a seat at a table she didn't belong at. The irony was almost elegant. It was like listening to someone brag about a rental car to the person who owned the dealership. I exhaled slowly and turned back toward the ballroom. As I did, Daniel Moore appeared at my side again, his expression serious now, stripped of all pretense. "You were right," he said quietly. "About them." I nodded once. "I know." He hesitated. "It's bad." "I know," I repeated, softer this time. Inside the ballroom, the party carried on blissfully unaware. Evan stood near the bar, laughing at something Lila had said earlier, completely blind to the ground shifting beneath him. My mother chatted animatedly with Elaine Grant, the two women mirroring each other's smiles like reflections in a glass. They had no idea, and that was the part that hurt the most. Lila had believed she was winning. She thought she'd assessed the situation correctly. She thought she'd identified the weak link and dismissed it. What she didn't realize was that her confidence rested entirely on a misunderstanding, one my family had helped create. I caught my reflection in a mirrored column as I crossed the room. Calm, composed, unassuming. The same mask I'd worn for years. It had protected me once. Tonight, it would do something else entirely. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger burns hot and fast. What I felt now was colder, more deliberate, purposeful. Lila Grant had shown me exactly how she viewed the world, who she respected, who she used, who she discarded. And she'd done it thinking I was powerless to respond. She was wrong. I glanced at my watch. 12 minutes until 9. Across the room, I saw Howard Grant straighten his tie, his posture shifting as he prepared himself. Elaine touched his arm, whispering something I couldn't hear. Lila rejoined Evan, slipping seamlessly back into place, her smile radiant, her eyes bright with expectation. They thought they were almost safe. I moved toward the back of the ballroom, positioning myself where I could see everything without being seen. Daniel caught my eye from near the service entrance, waiting for instruction. I gave him a small, nearly imperceptible nod. Lila had told me to stay away, to disappear quietly, to accept my place. Instead, I was about to remind her of something very simple. People who underestimate you never see you coming. The moment I nodded at Daniel, something inside me settled. This wasn't impulse. It wasn't revenge. It was a decision I'd been circling since the parking garage, since Rachel's voice had confirmed what my instincts already knew. Once you understand the full shape of a problem, hesitation stops being caution and starts becoming negligence. Daniel moved first. He slipped toward the service corridor without drawing attention, already speaking quietly into his headset. The staff responded the way they always did, efficiently, without panic. To anyone watching, nothing changed. Music continued. Laughter floated. Glasses were refilled. That was the beauty of preparation. It didn't look dramatic. It looked boring. I took out my phone and dialed Claire Donovan again. She answered immediately. "I was about to call you." "Tell me," I said. "It's all real," she replied. "Active federal warrants, wire fraud, investment fraud, conspiracy. They've been moving states to stay ahead of the investigation, changing names. The grants aren't even their real identities." "I know," I said. "Where are we on timing?" There was a pause, the sound of keys tapping in the background. "I spoke to the lead investigator," Claire said carefully. "Special Agent Laura Mitchell. She's been trying to locate them for months. If you can confirm they're all in one place, publicly identifiable, she can be there within minutes." I glanced toward the stage at the front of the ballroom. Howard Grant was standing near it now, testing the microphone with the DJ, confident, smiling, completely unaware. "They're all here," I said, "and they're about to be very visible." Claire exhaled. "Then don't give them a chance to run. Once the evidence is public, they'll have nowhere to hide." "I won't," I said, and ended the call. For the first time that night, I allowed myself to feel the weight of what was coming. Not fear, responsibility. Once I started this, there was no stepping back. My brother's engagement would end publicly. My mother's illusions would collapse in front of everyone she cared about impressing. And the Grants, whatever their real names were, would lose everything they'd built on lies. I didn't enjoy that thought, but I accepted it. Daniel reappeared beside me, his voice low. AV is ready. Screens, sound, backup power, all synced. I reached into my bag and handed him a small USB drive. On it were scanned court filings, financial records, articles from Arizona, identity matches, timelines, everything Rachel had confirmed and Claire had verified. Truth, stripped of emotion. When Howard starts his toast, I said, I want everything on the screens, one document at a time, slow enough for people to read. Daniel's lips pressed together briefly. Understood. He hesitated, then added, Security is standing by. Good, I said. We'll need them. My phone vibrated in my hand. Evan's name lit up the screen. I stared at it for a long moment before answering. Sid, he said, his voice tight. Can we talk? Something feels off. With Lila's parents. With everything. I closed my eyes briefly. This was the moment I'd hoped wouldn't come, and the one I'd known was inevitable. What's wrong? I asked gently. I don't know, he admitted. Howard keeps disappearing. Lila avoids questions about her past. I feel like I'm missing something. You are, I thought. Years worth. We'll talk after the toast, I said. Okay? There was a pause. Yeah, he said finally. Okay. I ended the call before doubt could creep into his voice. If I warned him now, he might warn Lila, and if she knew what was coming, she would try to run. I couldn't let that happen. I checked the time, 8:56. Across the room, my mother laughed at something Elaine Grant said, leaning in conspiratorially like they were old friends. Two women bonded by appearances, neither realizing how thin that bond actually was. 8:58. Howard Grant stepped onto the small stage, straightening his jacket, lifting the microphone with practiced ease. The DJ lowered the music. Conversations tapered off. Glasses were raised. This was the moment they'd planned for, the moment they believed would seal their future. I positioned myself near the back of the ballroom, half hidden by a column, with a clear view of the stage and the screens behind it. Daniel stood near the control booth, one hand resting casually on the console, the other at his side. My phone buzzed again. Claire, Agent Mitchell is outside, waiting for your signal. I typed one word back. Ready. Howard cleared his throat, smiling broadly. Good evening, everyone, he began. Thank you all for being here to celebrate this beautiful union. The screens behind him lit up with a slideshow of Evan and Lila, laughing at restaurants, posing on beaches, playing their parts perfectly. For now. I thought of what Lila had said to me earlier, that I was dead weight, that no one would miss me, that I should stay away. The funny thing about people who underestimate you is that they never imagine you're capable of ending the story. Howard raised his glass. To family, he said. To legacy. To forever. I lifted my phone and sent Daniel the signal. Now. For a split second, no one understood what was happening. The slideshow froze mid-smile, Evan and Lila framed against a beach sunset, and then vanished. In its place, a stark document filled the massive screens behind the stage. Black text, official seals, dense paragraphs that looked nothing like celebration. A murmur rippled through the ballroom. Howard Grant's smile faltered. Just barely at first. He glanced over his shoulder, confusion flickering across his face as he squinted at the screen. There seems to be a technical issue, he said into the microphone, forcing a laugh that didn't quite land. If someone could... The screen changed. Another document appeared. This one highlighted, numbers circled, company names connected by arrows. A headline from an Arizona business journal slid into view beneath it. Investors file civil suit in real estate fraud case. The murmur grew louder. Howard's face drained of color. This is highly inappropriate, he snapped, turning toward the control booth. Turn that off, now. No one moved. Instead, the screen shifted again. Photos appeared this time. Older ones. A younger woman with darker hair standing beside Howard and Elaine at a charity gala. Different names printed beneath their faces, different city, same eyes. Lila froze in the center of the dance floor. Her champagne glass trembled in her hand, liquid sloshing dangerously close to the rim. She stared at the screen, then at Howard, then back at the screen again. The carefully curated mask she wore so well cracked completely. Evan followed her gaze, confusion tightening into disbelief. Lila? He asked quietly. What is this? Howard tried to speak, but no sound came out. Elaine grabbed his arm, whispering urgently, her voice sharp with panic. Guests leaned toward one another, reading, whispering, connecting dots in real time. That was when I stepped forward. My boots echoed against the marble as I walked through the parted crowd, each step deliberate, unhurried. Heads turned. Conversations died mid-sentence. Eyes followed me as I moved toward the stage. Daniel's voice came calmly over the speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, we apologize for the interruption. Please allow me to introduce the owner of the Halcyon Hotel and CEO of Holt Hospitality Group. The silence that followed was absolute. Please welcome Ms. Sydney Holt. My mother's face went white. Evan stared at me as if seeing a stranger. Even Lila, caught between fear and fury, looked genuinely stunned. I took the microphone from Howard's limp hand and faced the room. Good evening, I said evenly. I'm sorry to disrupt the celebration, but I thought you deserved to know who you were really here to celebrate tonight. Lila found her voice first. This is a lie, she snapped, stepping forward. She's jealous. She's always been jealous. This is what she does. She makes things up because she can't stand not being the center of attention. I met her gaze calmly. Interesting, I said. Because these documents aren't opinions, they're court filings. The screen shifted again, this time to a federal case number. Warrants highlighted in yellow. These individuals, I continued, are under active investigation for wire fraud, investment fraud, and conspiracy. The woman you know as Lila Grant is actually named Megan Brooks, and this engagement was not about love. The ballroom doors opened behind me. 4 people in dark suits entered, badges visible, expressions all business. Special Agent Laura Mitchell led them, her gaze locking immediately onto Howard. Lila's face crumpled. Howard bolted. He made it less than 10 feet before security stepped in. Agent Mitchell caught up easily, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. Howard Grant, she said coolly, or whatever your real name is, you're under arrest. Elaine began to cry, mascara streaking down her cheeks as she protested between sobs. Lila turned to Evan, desperation flooding her features. You have to believe me, she pleaded. They're lying. You know me. You love me. Evan looked at her for a long, painful moment. Then he stepped back. I don't even know who you are, he said quietly. Something dark flashed across Lila's face. She lunged toward me, screaming that I had ruined everything, that I was supposed to be nobody, that I was just the stinky country girl. Security caught her before she reached me. I leaned in close enough that only she could hear. This country girl owns the room you're standing in, I said softly. And I sleep very well knowing exactly who I am. She was dragged away still screaming, her perfect image unraveling with every step. I turned back to the stunned guests and took a breath. The catering is already paid for, I said calmly, and it seems like a shame to waste good food. Nervous laughter rippled through the room. The bar will stay open, I added, for anyone who'd like to stay. The DJ hesitated, then put on something upbeat. The engagement party was over, but the truth had finally arrived. The next hour passed in fragments, like a dream remembered in pieces. Howard and Elaine Grant were escorted out in handcuffs, their protest dissolving into silence as the ballroom doors closed behind them. Lila, Megan, Sandra, whatever name she planned to use next, was still screaming as she was led away, threats and promises tumbling out of her mouth, all of them suddenly weightless. She had gone from future bride to federal detainee in under 15 minutes. Inside the ballroom, the shock slowly gave way to something else. Curiosity, unease, a quiet reckoning. Guests whispered into their phones. Some slipped out early, others stayed, drawn by the strange gravity of a night that would be talked about for years. The ice sculptures melted. The champagne fountain kept flowing. The music played on, softer now, tentative. Evan found me near the bar. He looked like someone who had just woken up inside a different life. His eyes were red, his hands unsteady, his confidence stripped away down to something raw and honest. "How did you know?" he asked. "How did you figure it out?" "I listened," I said simply. "I watched. I paid attention." He nodded slowly. Then his shoulders sagged. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know that doesn't fix anything, but I'm sorry." I studied his face, searching for excuses, for deflection. I didn't find any. "It's a start," I said, and for the first time in years, it felt like the truth. My mother approached next. Linda Holt looked smaller somehow, as if the evening had physically shrunk her. She didn't try to defend herself. She didn't perform. She just stood there, uncertain. I pulled out my phone and showed her the records. Years of payments, quiet transfers, mortgage statements, medical bills. All from Holt Hospitality Group. All from me. She stared at the screen, then at me. I thought it was Evan," she whispered. "I know," I said gently. "That's why I never said anything. But you deserve to know." Her eyes filled, real tears this time. "Sydney," she said, like she was learning how to say my name properly for the first time. Before either of us could speak again, Evan bent down near the dance floor. Something glittered against the marble. He picked it up carefully and walked toward me. My grandmother's necklace. "This was always meant for you," he said quietly, placing it in my hand. The weight of it felt right, familiar, like something that had been waiting. 3 weeks later, I stood in my office at the Halcyon, sunlight spilling across the city skyline. The grants were finished, federal charges, frozen accounts. No escape this time. The story made the news briefly. One headline called me the country girl who owned the room. I framed that one. Evan visited the hotel for the first time. We had lunch, not the polite kind, but the honest kind. My mother started therapy, slowly, carefully, no miracles, just effort. That morning, during a business breakfast, a young woman hesitated at the entrance. An investor made a careless comment about her not belonging. I stood, walked over, and introduced her as the recipient of the Holt Hospitality Scholarship. I watched her shoulders relax as she took her seat at the table. After the breakfast, I stood in the lobby watching guests come and go. People will always try to make you feel small for where you came from. Let them. While they're busy looking down, they won't see you rising. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to like the video, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Your support keeps these stories alive. And from one former country girl to another, never forget who you are, even when the room tries to tell you otherwise.